The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a weekend filled with news. Let's start at the top. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the most conservative members of the Supreme Court, one of the most hated members of the Supreme Court by progressives and liberals alike, passed away in his sleep at the age of 79 over the weekend. And the context of this is, of course, the 2016 election. And we're going to get in the next segment to some of the circumstances of Justice Scalia's death, which are increasingly being questioned by some on the right. But let's talk first about the political implications here. Huge importance of the 2016 election, in part, is not just what the next president will do in terms of proposing legislation, in terms of his executive action, et cetera, but 4 justices expected to be in their 80s during the next presidential term: Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Anthony Kennedy, Stephen Breyer, and the now deceased Antonin Scalia. The Democratic winner, a Democratic winner in November, could set up the Supreme Court to be the most liberal Supreme Court in a very, very long time. A Republican winner in November could have really disastrous effects and could set up the Supreme Court to be disastrously more conservative than it has been in a long time. Now, in the context of this, when we think about the passing of Antonin Scalia, I've really been thinking over the weekend, Lewis, of how to sort of couch this. I never pray, or I never pray, but if I were to pray, or when I think about what I would like to happen, I never wish for somebody to die. But I think we can objectively say the country is far better off with Antonin Scalia, not one of the 9 Supreme Court justices. There is no doubt about that.
Now, I would say there probably are people you wish would die. One of them being Kim Jong-un, for example. So I would just say that Antonin Scalia was not maybe one of the ones that you wish would die. And I guess I don't think that either. I don't walk around all day saying, I wish Thomas and Scalia, I wish they would just die. But
you do wish they weren't on the court. You know, we'd be better off if they weren't on the court.
If this is what it takes for someone like Scalia to not be on the court, great.
You're not going to cry over it, I think, is the point you're making. The Republican Party, though, now that President Obama will have the opportunity to nominate a replacement to Antonin Scalia, has already shown their cards. They've already shown their hand. And it's very clear they're going to do everything they can up and to the point at which it is politically just not viable anymore to block that replacement. Let's take a look at what Mitch McConnell said, Republican Senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, who went on Facebook and said, "Today, our country lost an unwavering champion of a timeless document that unites each of us as Americans, blah, 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 blah." And then at the end, just as an aside, the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. Hold on a second, Lewis. The American people did get a chance to have a say in who will be this next Supreme Court justice. It's called voting for Obama in 2012, which specifically gives him the authority to nominate Supreme Court candidates for seats that become open during his presidency. It's not, okay, yeah, President Obama during 2013 and 2014 and 2015 being elected in 2012 gives him the right and authority to correctly decide who is nominated to the Supreme Court. But 2016 is his last year in office. So I don't know. We should just wait for the people to have a say again in who the next president is, delay this thing totally unnecessarily, merely for political gain. Mitch McConnell, and he's one example, there's many on the right who are saying the same thing, is forgetting that we already decided who in 2016 gets to nominate Supreme Court justices. His name is President Obama. He won in 2012.
Constitutional fact. That is true.
Undeniable.
Yes, undeniable constitutional fact. If there was a Republican president right now and Republicans controlled all of Congress, there would have been a nomination yesterday.
Well, yeah, or today, right? I mean, first business day. Certainly, it would have happened very quickly, I think, is the point. Now, by many legal experts' opinion, the top choice right now would be Sri Srinivasan, who is a former senior Justice Department official for whom President Obama fought to confirm a seat on the U.S. Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia. He's 48 years old. Born in India, his family came to the U.S., to Kansas specifically, in the 1960s, which is where he grew up. He has degrees from Stanford in law school, business school, undergraduate, etc. Blocking him indefinitely, or whoever is the eventual nominee, really could have huge political consequences. And Lewis, in thinking about this, there is a huge risk to the Republicans saying we're gonna stand in the way until we have until we have an election here, particularly if the nominee is either a woman or a minority in some way. It could really backfire on Republicans and revitalize the Obama electorate that was record turnout for President Obama. And it could actually totally backfire and really end up helping the eventual Democratic nominee, Lewis, if the Republicans were to do this. I really don't believe they're going to be able to block this nominee indefinitely. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Well, I hope not. But I think that they're really just kind of gambling here, right?
Huge gamble.
It's a gamble in that it could in some way affect the election. But what they're hoping is that there will just be a Republican president next, and then everything will be fine. But it might not be.
It might not be. And I guess their hope is right now we know we don't have a Republican president. Maybe we will come next January. Allegations are surfacing in the wake of the passing of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia that he was murdered. We are already seeing many on the right start to sort of imply and focus on very specific elements of reports that have been out there. The understanding over the weekend was that 79-year-old Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia died in his sleep of natural causes, and there is absolutely no controversy here. However, here are, as I understand them, the sort of different bits and pieces that some are putting together to paint this as a potential deliberate killing of the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Number one, it reportedly took hours for authorities in West Texas, which is very remote, to find a justice of the peace, according to officials. And when they did, Presidio County Judge Cinderella Guevara pronounced Scalia dead of natural causes without ever seeing the body. This is the first piece, Lewis, that some are pointing to say it's suspicious. Hold on a second, though. That is absolutely permissible under Texas law. You don't need to order an autopsy. You don't need to see the body. Whether this is a good idea or not, that is a different question. But this is the law. There is nothing controversial about that whatsoever. Next, there were conflicting reports about whether an autopsy should have been performed. A manager at the El Paso funeral home where Antonin Scalia's body was taken said that Scalia's own family made it very clear that they did not want an autopsy. One of two other officials who were called, who couldn't get to Scalia's body in time, said, we would have gone about this differently. Juanita Bishop, for example, a justice of the peace in Presidio, Texas, said, if it had been me, I would want to know, meaning she would have ordered an autopsy. But again, Lewis, this is circumstantial opinion. It's not really indicative of anything on the facts, is it?
That's true. But there is one interesting fact you're about to bring up, and that is that he was discovered in the hotel room with a pillow over his face, right?
This morning, right-wing website drudgereport.com linked to an article that talked about many elements of the passing of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, but it highlighted a comment made by Houston businessman John Poindexter, who owns this 30,000-acre luxury ranch where Antonin Scalia was found dead, and he is quoted as saying, we discovered the judge in bed, a pillow over his head. His bedclothes were unwrinkled. So the implication, of course, Lewis, if Scalia was merely sleeping, why on earth would he have a pillow over his head? Alluding to images of someone being choked to death, strangled to death effectively by a pillow placed over their head. Of course, this again is just assuming so much, Lewis. It could have been that Scalia had already started tossing in the early morning hours. And as some people might do, maybe to block light or for whatever reason, puts a pillow over his head and then dies in his sleep. I mean, it is the amount, the length to which the right, some on the right are already going to say this is all very, very suspicious. And right now, what a coincidence. Maybe a Democrat is not going to win, and they're putting in now by taking out Scalia, President Obama has the opportunity to nominate a new Supreme Court justice. Listen, If the idea was to kill off a conservative Supreme Court justice so that Obama could nominate a new one, they could have been a little bit smarter and have done it with more time before the election, right? To not cause this huge rush that now is going to take place. I think it is incredible that we're already seeing this, not even 48 hours later. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah, and well, a tidbit like that about the pillow, it's
Salacious
unavoidable at
in
this
some
point.
way.
It is. It's quite. So I think it's fine. Get the autopsy if that will ease everyone's concerns.
Hold on a second, though. Isn't it the family's right to choose? I mean, it's crazy we're talking about this with Scalia,
No,
right?
I know.
The family has opted out. They don't want it.
That's fine. That's fine. I don't think he was in the best shape. He was certainly not a young man. Okay, I don't find it crazy that he died of what they're saying is his heart attack or his heart stopping. But what's the harm in getting the autopsy? If it'll shut everyone up, you get the autopsy, you find out for sure. And let me just add that I frequently have a pillow over my head when I'm sleeping.
Lewis almost exclusively sleeps with 1 or 2 pillows over his head. Nothing suspicious about that. And Lewis still comes to work every day. So listen, that's what's going on there. We'll continue to follow it. Lots of questions lately about superdelegates. Bernie Sanders handily won the New Hampshire popular vote in the primary for the Democrats, but Hillary Clinton still came away with more delegates in total because of these unpledged superdelegates that are broadly believed to be supporting Hillary Clinton regardless of the election's outcome. Now, we can argue over whether if Bernie Sanders continues to win primaries, those unpledged superdelegates will not come over to the Bernie Sanders side. That's a debate we can have, but let's not have it today. What I want to talk about today is that DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, 2008 campaign co-chair for Hillary Clinton, widely considered to have her finger or her hand or her entire arm or her entire body on the scales for Hillary Clinton in this primary race, was interviewed by CNN's Jake Tapper, and she was asked, what do you say to those who question the role of these superdelegates and don't like what's going on? What do you say to them? And what she said, Lewis, was so telling. She really got to the reality here. Let's take a look and listen.
And in New Hampshire, the unpledged delegates are a separate category. The only thing available on the ballot in a primary and a caucus is the pledged delegates, those that are tied to the candidate that they are pledged to support, and they receive a proportional number of delegates going into our convention. Unpledged delegates exist really to make sure that party leaders and elected officials don't have to be in a position where they are running against grassroots activists. We are, as a Democratic Party, really highlight and emphasize inclusiveness and diversity at our convention, and so we want to give every opportunity to grassroots activists and diverse, committed Democrats to be able to participate, attend, and be a delegate at the convention. And so we separate out those unpledged delegates to make sure that there isn't competition between them.
Right. We want to be as inclusive and diverse as humanly possible, but only when it comes to those pledged delegates. And we're going to separate out a whole bunch of unpledged delegates so that we can keep out the grassroots activists and basically limit this to establishment Democrats supporting establishment Democrats, no matter what the turnout of the election is. Mm-hmm. It's a shocking admission, Lewis, though it is precisely correct. We have the superdelegate system, and the system is de facto
rigged,
protecting the party establishment. This is by definition anti-democratic. It is anti-democratic in that you have certain political positions which get you a vote in this nomination process that is not in any way tied to the actual election results, which is how democracy is done, people voting.
Yes. And I don't think she was even thinking about it when she said this. I think she just, she understands what these superdelegates are, why they exist, and she probably wasn't thinking about the context of this election.
Right.
And so, well, I guess it didn't stop Bernie, did it?
It didn't stop Bernie, at least not in New Hampshire, and we will talk about what's going on in Nevada coming up. But stunning, stunning admission. I don't even think she realizes it is an admission, but it is an admission by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We'll take a break. What a show we have for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Thomas Amin. You may have heard me mention, Thomas certainly did, that our show is funded by viewers and listeners, not by huge media conglomerates or big corporations. So Thomas, by being a member, is voting with his dollars and supporting alternatives to corporate media. I encourage you to do the same as Tom by going to davidpakman.com/membership. And if you ever shop on Amazon.com, go to davidpakman.com/Amazon to support us with any Amazon shopping that you do. Okay, the Republicans did have a debate over the weekend, and it erupted into true chaos. I mean, just utter embarrassment, Lewis. It started very, very calm with a moment of silence to remember Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who passed away over the weekend. But then it was yelling. It was accusations of lies, accusations of dishonesty and misogyny, and a ton of boos, both for and against candidates. And during the second hour of the Republican debate on Saturday in South Carolina, this got beyond anything I've seen in any of these debates, Lewis. And we know that the Democratic debates have been about issues, and the Republican debates have been about who lied when and when did they realize they were lying, and who's more religious and who's more patriotic and who's going to beat China better and all of this stuff. But Ted Cruz and Donald Trump really got into it over this conversation that there are inconsistencies, to say the least, about Donald Trump's political positions. And it just got very, very ugly. Let's take a look at this. It is just incredible what went on here. Pathetic in a sense.
You notice Donald didn't disagree with the substance, that he supports taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. And Donald has this weird pattern. When you point to his own record, he screams, liar, liar, liar. If you want to go,
where did I support it? Where did I support it? Hey, Ted, where did I support it?
If you want to go and watch the video, go to website TedCruz.org.
Where did I support it, Ted?
Out of Donald's own mouth.
Where did I support it?
You supported it when we were battling over defunding Planned Parenthood. You went on television and said Planned Parenthood does wonderful things and we should not defund them.
Well, it does do wonderful things, but not as it relates to abortion.
So tell me, what are the wonderful things? What are the wonderful things it does?
There are wonderful things having to do with women's health.
You see, you and I disagree on that.
Not when it comes to abortion. That's where
John, the reason principle matters. The reason principle matters, sadly, was illustrated by the first questions today. The next president is going to appoint 1, 2, 3, 4 Supreme Court justices. If Donald Trump is president, he will appoint liberals. If Donald Trump is president, your Second Amendment will go away.
Hold on, McCord.
You know how I know that?
Hold on, gentlemen. I'm going to turn this car around.
John Roberts, Ted Cruz, with your brother, wanted John Roberts to be in the United States Supreme Court. They both pushed him. He twice approved Obamacare.
All right, gentlemen.
My name was my name was mentioned twice.
Well, hold on. Gentlemen, we're in danger of driving this into the dirt.
You gave us
Senator
Obamacare.
Rubio. I'd like you to. You want to jump in here?
A liar.
I understand. You're on deck, Governor.
He also denigrated one of my.
Yeah. What a mess, Lewis. I mean, what a mess. And I have to tell you, Trump got the better of that, right? I mean, absolutely, Trump got the better of that. It is absolutely true. First of all, it is absolutely true that even if you're pro-life or against abortion, why wouldn't you recognize the 97% of stuff that Planned Parenthood does that has nothing to do with abortion that is completely uncontroversially good? And I absolutely applaud Donald Trump for saying that. I don't believe Donald Trump is anti-abortion. I think it's all just a lie to placate and appeal to these right-wing voters. But let's assume he is for a second. Yeah, he's right. The other stuff that Planned Parenthood does is uncontroversial. And he's absolutely right that when you look at who's on the Supreme Court today, look at who Ted Cruz voted in favor of. I think he absolutely crushes Cruz on that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably his best performance thus far.
And then we got to a conversation between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio about amnesty and undocumented immigration. And then they started arguing both in English and in Spanish about who lied and who told the truth. This is just amazing.
The Rubio-Schumer amnesty plan.
Ooh.
Apparently supported by the donor class, which is why Washington supported it. The Rubio-Schumer amnesty plan passed the Senate, and it was on the verge of passing the House. House leadership intended to take it up and pass it with the Democrats overruling most of the Republicans. And the question for anyone on illegal immigration is, where were you in that fight? Where did you stand? You are right.
Yeah.
There is a difference between Senator Rubio and me on this question.
We're going to have to do...
Your reply.
We're going to have to do this again, okay? When that issue was being debated, Ted Cruz at a committee hearing very passionately said, I want immigration reform to pass. I want people to be able to come out of the shadows. And he proposed an amendment that would have legalized people here. Not only that, he proposed doubling the number of green cards. He proposed a 500% increase on guest workers.
Right.
Now his position is different. Now he is a passionate opponent of all those things. So he either wasn't telling the truth then, or he isn't telling the truth now.
Right.
But to argue he's a purist on immigration is just not true.
Major, I get a response to that.
Very quickly.
All right, Senator Cruz, your response, Senator Cruz.
You know, the lines are very, very clear. Marco right now supports citizenship for 12 million people here illegally. I oppose citizenship. Marco stood on the debate stage and said that. But I would note, not only that, Marco has a long record when it comes to amnesty. In the state of Florida, as Speaker of the House, he supported in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. In addition to that, Marco went on Univision in Spanish and said he would not rescind President Obama's illegal executive amnesty on his first day in office. I have promised to rescind every single illegal executive action, including that one. And on the question,
Well, first of all, I don't know how he knows what I said on Univision because he doesn't speak Spanish. And
Ooh.
second of all, the other point that I would make...
Marco, si quieres, díselo ahora mismo, díselo ahora. En español, si quieres.
This is a disturbing pattern.
Yeah. Anyway, Ted Cruz making just a grave, even in that one sentence, made a mistake using the word díselo, but that doesn't matter. We won't even get into that. Lewis, I mean, it doesn't get much better than this. These guys are cannibalizing each other, and it is everything we could have imagined it would be. Donald Trump standing in the middle saying, I'm not getting involved in this one. I'll go back to calling Cruz a liar after this calms down. Just an incredible display of insanity.
It is entertaining. It's entertainment. And the crowd makes it seem like this is the political equivalent of the Jerry Springer show or something.
And it is. And it absolutely is. And it could not be more different than when you see nuanced discussions about 12 versus a $15 minimum wage on the Democratic side. I mean, could not be more different. Let's update you about what's going on the Democratic side. Last week, I told you that polling in Nevada and South Carolina, the next two Democratic primary states, had Hillary Clinton well ahead in both, up 20 points in Nevada. But we were aware that we didn't really have recent polling from Nevada last week. I got a ton of emails over the weekend saying, David, there is a new poll in Nevada and Bernie Sanders is tied with Hillary Clinton in Nevada. And I said, I have to see this. This cannot be true. And it is true. There is a poll that has Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton tied in the upcoming Nevada primary. But the poll is from the Washington Free Beacon and Target Point Consulting, both right-wing organizations. Why would it matter, though? They're just polling Democrats. Well, if you believe that the Republican Party wants Bernie to be the Democratic nominee because they think it will be easier for a Republican to defeat Bernie than it would be to defeat Hillary, then you could suggest that right-wing pollsters would have an interest in making it seem as though Bernie is more viable than he is. But what really matters is the methodology. That's where the truth is. And when we looked at the methodology, Lewis, we found there was a sample size of 1,236, which is perfect. We saw a margin of error plus or minus 3%, which makes sense. This poll included all registered voters, 2/3 of whom responded that they are definitely voting, 45% of which have caucused in the past. So reasonable. I mean, a reasonable model and distribution of who is included in this poll. The poll did have both negative Hillary and negative Bernie questions. Like, for example, would you vote for Hillary Clinton in spite of the fact that she would kill babies if given the opportunity, right? They throw in these negative questions, but those were after just asking who would you vote for, and there were negative questions about Bernie as well. So that made me think this does seem like a pretty legit poll. And then Nate Silver's 538.com said, based on their analysis, there is a 50-50 shot for each candidate in Nevada. So, Lewis, it looks like Nevada is now very much in play. It feels like Groundhog's Day. State after state, we say, hey, Hillary's got this one. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she doesn't.
People are feeling the burn.
Wow.
What other explanation is there, Dave? They're feeling the burn.
I don't think there is much of another explanation there. No question about it. And then a quick update nationally on the Democratic side. Last week, I told you about this Quinnipiac poll that Hillary Clinton was up 2 points nationally over Bernie Sanders in, and we said, okay, that's within the margin of error. Could they really be tied nationally? It seems like an outlier. Maybe that Quinnipiac poll is slightly an outlier, but we now have another national poll that has Bernie Sanders very, very close. This is the Morning Consult tracking poll, which sees Hillary Clinton leading Bernie Sanders by 7, based on the most recent polling data taken February 10 to 11. You will see that in the same poll, Bernie Sanders was down 16 points in the first few days of February, down 13 points in the sort of end of the first week of February, and now has closed the national gap to only 7 points. And if you think about a margin of error, plus or minus 3 or 4 points, we have something increasingly close to a tie here, Lewis, nationally. I mean, this is just unbelievable. It isn't, whatever ultimately happens, this is amazing.
Well, I think H.A. Goodman is probably patting himself on the back right now.
Right.
And it is pretty incredible. I think that I'm not sure. Well, we have seen some Bernie ads as of late. I don't know about their effectiveness. I don't know if that is having a difference here. But I am seeing more social media Bernie posts and memes than ever, Dave.
Right.
And they are incredible.
Yeah, Lewis, basically, you don't care about, so you're really analyzing the quality of the memes. And when the memes get really good, that's a good sign for the candidate. I think we
Hey,
can all
you know
say.
what? That's what people see. This day and age, that's what people see. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. This is what they see.
Speaking of Instagram, follow me on Instagram, instagram.com/david.pakman, or just search for david.pakman on Instagram. Lewis, Instagram is blowing up, and there's behind-the-scenes pictures of Lewis doing, quote, production in the studio. It's unbelievable. People should check it out. We'll take a break and be back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Alec Karakatsanis, who's a civil rights lawyer dedicated to transforming the American criminal injustice system. Alec, we've been talking about bail and the bail bond system in the United States for a very long time. Let's sort of start at the most fundamental level. When someone is brought into court, what is the basis on which the amount of bail is decided, and whether there is even bail at all?
So after someone's arrested in all 50 states, they're brought to jail, and in most circumstances, they're told, you're eligible for release immediately, but you have to give us some money first. And in some places, that decision is based on a chart that is based purely on the offense that the person has been charged with. And in other places, they go for some officer, some magistrate, some judge, and the judge just sort of picks a number, an amount of money. And typically that's happening without any inquiry at all into whether the person can afford that amount of money. That's interestingly not the case in the District of Columbia, where I live and practice, or in any of the federal courts in any of the 50 states around the country. In those systems, people are released prior to trial without having to pay any money, unless the government that they're a danger to the community or risk of flight. And so in the federal system and in DC, decisions about whether a human being is kept in a cage prior to trial are made based on evidence and about whether they're a danger rather than based on someone's poverty. But in all of the other states, whether you stay in jail after you're arrested by the police depends solely on whether you can afford to pay bail.
And now explain how the bail bond system works. As you mentioned, your ability to pay that bail may vary drastically, and it often does. So talk about what service a bail bondsman provides to someone who has been set a bail realistically that they cannot afford.
So in 46 states, we have what's called the commercial bail bond industry. There are 4 states that have outlawed bail bondsmen. The United States and the Philippines are the only 2 countries in the world that still allow commercial bail bondsmen. What this industry does is it preys upon the people that are too poor to afford to pay the bail that's been set by the court. They come in and they say, if you give us a percentage of that amount, we will tell the court that we'll cover the rest. Now, they typically, because they control so many state legislatures and local government systems, they've typically passed rules that actually protect them even from having to pay at all, even if you don't show up. They're risking virtually nothing. What they then do is they trap these people in these incredibly onerous exploitative contracts. So sometimes they might say, you give us 5% of the money bail, and then you agree to pay us the rest at the highest allowable interest rate under law for years. So you could be like some of our clients, you could be arrested by the police, and then you could be held in jail on a bond you can't afford. And then you go to a bail bondsman, you make a payment, and now you owe them money for years. And the very next day, the prosecutor looks at your case and says, there's no crime here, or there's not enough evidence, and they dismiss the case. Now you're stuck owing money to the bail bondsman for a case that was never prosecuted. And this is the way in which the bail bond industry transfers billions of dollars every year from the poorest people in our society, those people that are accused of crimes and their families who can't afford bail, to some of the richest people in the country, the bail bond industry and the insurance companies that underwrite them.
One of the incredible circumstances of this industry is that, on the one hand, the bail bonds industry sometimes likes to defend itself by saying, listen, if you're sitting there in pretrial detention, it's going to be tougher for you to build the strongest case possible to defend yourself when your court date ultimately comes. At the same time, though, Alec, that same industry is lobbying all the time to put more alleged crimes under the list qualifying for pre-trial detention unless you are able to pay bail. They're sort of creating a bigger and bigger market for themselves, aren't they?
They are. There are about 500,000 human beings on any given night in this country who are in a jail cell because they cannot afford to pay bail. That's the way the bail industry likes it. They want as many people as possible as potential customers. So they're constantly lobbying state and local governments for more. Another incredible thing that they do is they lobby state and local governments for other policies that subtly help them. So for example, in the state of Louisiana, if I'm arrested and brought to court for a bail hearing, the public defender that represents me, the prosecutor that's arguing against me, the sheriff that brought me there, and the judge that is making a decision about my bail all take by statute a percentage cut of the money bail that's set in my case. And that statute was put into place by the bail bond industry to give everyone in the system an incentive to keep that bail bond industry thriving. And that's the kind of perverse incentives that we're seeing all over the country with the bail bond industry.
Now,
and what's really interesting.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say what's really interesting about the point you just made is the bail bond industry likes to advertise itself as helping to release people. And yet, in our lawsuits, after you see them filed, we see a lot of fear mongering by the bail bond industry about how, well, if you get rid of the bail bond industry, you're going to be releasing all these criminals, which is the very advertising slogan that they've been going by for years. What's fascinating about it, and the reason why a lot of police and prosecutors and sheriffs are really opposed to the bail industry, is that if you believe that a person is a danger to the community, and you think that person could harm other people while they're awaiting trial, why in the world would you release that person just because they have money? If someone is a dangerous predator, I would argue they're even more dangerous if they have resources and money. So the bail bond industry is advocating for a system that releases Robert Durst, but that cages Sandra Bland. And that is absolutely absurd.
Do you have data nationally on what percentage of alleged perpetrators are not even offered bail? In other words, they are considered such a risk to society that bail is not even an option. And then how many are offered bail but ultimately never pay it, either directly or via bail bondsman, and how many do pay the bail and get out? Do we have some sort of sense of those numbers?
No, and in fact, no one's keeping those numbers precisely because of the incentives involved here. The bail bond industry doesn't want there to be decisions made about people's dangerousness. They want people to be offered high money bonds on the chance they could get the money together to pay it. So when courts all around the country in most states aren't ever making the determination that someone is dangerous, they're just estimating if a judge thinks that a person is dangerous in a state that uses a lot of commercial money bail, they'll just estimate an amount of money that they think the person can't afford. So they'll say, $1 million. On the hope that the person can't pay it. That's very unconstitutional, obviously, but that's what's happening in courts all over the country. And so no one is keeping any kind of data right now on the question that you asked, which is sort of what's happening to people that are really dangerous, and are they being released on bail because they're rich, and things like that. So we don't really know. All we know is that the money bail system is keeping hundreds of thousands of very low risk, nonviolent, and otherwise and offenders that we know through the data aren't likely to commit new offenses while they're pending trial in jail just because they're poor.
I want to go back to something you sort of alluded to, which is the sort of general lack of risk that bail bondsmen have for losing money. They claim, right, that they deserve to earn this sort of commission, typically 10%, for helping people get out of pretrial detention because they are taking on risk, right? If the alleged perpetrator disappears after they've been bailed out by the bail bondsman is on the hook for their entire bail. The reality, though, is that these bail bondsmen individually have insurance, and that if you look at the numbers, it is very rare that they actually are out anything close to 100% of the bail for any individual alleged perpetrator. They have a very solid insurance system in place.
It's very true. All of those empirical claims of the bond industry are complete fabrications. The other really interesting point is what they've negotiated for in a lot of states and a lot of jurisdictions is a grace period. So they don't have to, even if the person does skip out, they don't have to make that payment for 2, 3, 4 years, right? And so what you see then is they rely on the police. It's very, very common in our society that the police will then pick somebody up on a warrant because we've got the U.S. Marshals and local police and sheriffs who are out looking for people if they ever skip court. And when those people are then brought back in by the police, not by the bail industry doesn't have to pay. So they sort of free ride on law enforcement to assure themselves of never having to put any risk up. And as you say, even on the very, very, very small number of cases where they are exposed because the person skipped court, they have insurance to protect themselves from that. And it's actually those insurance companies, not individual bail bonds people, but those insurance companies that are providing a lot of the lobbying and the money and the financial support for a lot of these terrible policies. And I think
it's yet another example. It's yet another example where there's sort of capitalism for the profits while you socialize the risk.
That's exactly right. And what's really encouraging now is you're seeing law enforcement leaders all over the country, the Department of Justice, federal prosecutors, local sheriffs, national associations of police officers who are speaking out against this because the system makes absolutely no sense. It does not make sense to release people who might be dangerous just because they're rich. It does not make sense to hold people in a cage who might not risk at all just because they're poor.
We've been speaking with Alec Karakatsanis, civil rights lawyer. Thanks so much for talking to us about this really important issue.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to do a sort of correction to last week. We didn't really cover the story, but I mentioned in passing that the Congressional Black Caucus had endorsed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. That wasn't true. The Congressional Black Caucus PAC has endorsed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. And I watched a few minutes of Congressman John Lewis speaking about their endorsement. And to be clear, the Congressional Black Caucus PAC is a political action committee that supports members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It is not the Congressional Black Caucus. And John Lewis said something that really seemed like a crazy low blow and a total mischaracterization of Bernie Sanders' multi-decade track record of working on racial issues. He said, when asked about the record of Bernie Sanders during a little press conference they did, announcing the Congressional Black Caucus PAC's endorsement of Hillary Clinton, he said, listen, I never saw him and never met him doing civil rights work, although I did meet Hillary Clinton and I did meet Bill Clinton. I'm going to play this clip for you. Then I have a number of things to say about it. Take a look.
To be very frank, I don't want to cut you off, but I never saw him. I never met him. I would chair the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee for 3 years, from 1963 to 1966. I was involved in the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, the March on Washington, the March from Selma to Montgomery, and directed the Voter Education Project for 6 years. But I met Hillary Clinton. I met President Clinton.
Okay. Yeah. So John Lewis, yeah, I mean, he didn't see Bernie Sanders in those specific places in those specific years because Bernie Sanders was working on issues of civil rights and racial justice in other places. I mean, I think this is a total disaster, Lewis. First, this doesn't stand up to the fact in terms of Bernie Sanders, who worked dating all the way back to the University of Chicago in the 1960s with the Congress for Racial Equality, and so much other work. It doesn't correlate with John Lewis's own prior statements, who once stated to a Clinton biographer that the first time he even heard of Bill Clinton was the 1970s. Of what relevance is it that John Lewis didn't see Bernie in the 60s if he wants to just talk about Hillary and Bill, when he previously said he never even heard about Bill or the Clintons until the 1970s? But the real tragedy here is that he's belittling the undeniable civil rights work of Bernie Sanders because it didn't happen in Selma or wherever John Lewis believes the, quote, real work on racial justice was happening. And as a result, John Lewis is belittling the work that anybody does on civil rights and racial justice if it isn't in the right theater, the right place where he determines is where the racial justice work is going on. People are doing work on civil rights and racial justice all over the country all the time.
And if he didn't meet them, it's like it never happened?
If he didn't meet them, it doesn't matter. If it wasn't where he was, it doesn't matter. And this is really where the Democratic Party could damage itself, because we have been, for the most part, having a reasonable debate between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, more moderate Democrat and a more progressive Democrat, independent who caucuses with Democrats, about $12 versus $15 minimum wage, new Glass-Steagall or not, expand Social Security or enhance it, as Hillary says, right? Anyway, whatever you think, reasonable debate. This is the type of stuff that can really be what the Republicans are doing, which is doing irreparable damage to each other and to whoever ultimately comes out as the nominee. I don't like to see this at all, and it's particularly, these are really low blows against Bernie Sanders as well.
Well, welcome to the Hillary machine. It's about money.
Is that what you think?
It's about money. It's about power. We just talked about the Congressional Black Caucus PAC endorsement, okay? And in the case of John Lewis, I think maybe this is about some sweet appointment he might be banking on.
I don't even think you have to go that far if you want to find
why
connections.
Not? I mean,
there's already
this is a reality.
There's already connections that aren't even about future things between John Lewis and the Clintons, right? I mean, that's my point is we don't even have to go forward looking on it. That exists, but I think this is a disaster. This is a bad road for the Democrats to go down. I don't like it whatsoever. I think it's a bad political decision to start attacking Bernie Sanders in this way, even if he is ultimately not the nominee. Hey, I think you're really going to like this. On Morning Joe, Morning Joe is the MSNBC program. Former Republican Congressman Joe Scarborough is a host. Mika Brzezinski is on there. They've got Willie Geist. It's a whole cast of characters. The day after the New Hampshire win, Donald Trump called in and he talked about how he's so glad to have Joe Scarborough as a supporter of his. And immediately you see Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough, their eyes go wide. They don't know what hit them, Lewis. They don't want to be identified publicly as Donald Trump supporters. They start talking over each other in a desperate attempt to backtrack and sort of say, well, by supporters, you mean we thought you had a chance here, kind of. But, I mean, I'm not really sure. It's amazing. Let's listen to it. You're going to love it. I love it.
Well, Donald Trump, congratulations. How's your family holding up at this point?
Everyone's great. It was great seeing you, and you guys have been supporters, and I really appreciate it. And not necessarily supporters, but at least believers. You said there's some potential there, and the same thing with Bob. Bob has been a real professional, whereas other people were looking and saying, well, wait a minute, he's very successful as a developer and a business guy, but he's not a politician. And Bob got an early glance, and I appreciate Bob's fair reporting in the Washington Post very much so.
Okay.
Well, I will tell you what, when you say supporter, you're talking about how actually you're talking about Bob, Mika, myself also helping, Willie, and those of us around the table. There were a handful of people who for 6 months have been saying what happened last night could happen.
Yeah.
And the rest of the media world has been
But let me clarify what supporters
has
mean.
been mocking and ridiculing exactly what he's done.
This is kind of important because from the get-go, I mean, I don't agree. Donald and I have not agreed on things ever since we started talking about pageants on Morning Joe. So it's not like Donald and I have the same worldview. You guys might in some ways, but we knew that he could do this
Right.
from the get-go. So I think the sense is that we believed that his talents actually could follow through and translate into something, while everyone else underestimated him.
All right,
let's cut it there. So the reality is Joe Scarborough has openly bragged that he helped Donald Trump prepare for his first debate. There have been rumors, and what Donald Trump said there, it was so good to see you. What he meant was there's rumors that the previous night, both Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough met up with Donald Trump to celebrate the fact that he won in New Hampshire. And again, I guess they kind of wanted to keep it a secret, but CNN reported it anyway. And then the entire, this is just so funny. And I get it. Mika Brzezinski does not agree with Donald Trump politically. There's no doubt about that. But the visible panic and desperation to explain away what Donald Trump is talking about here, this is a golden media moment, Lewis. I absolutely relished watching the awkwardness on both of their faces.
Yeah, Joe wasn't too quick to kind of dismiss the support thing.
No,
right?
well, yeah, I mean, I think nobody knew what to do, right? And it is undeniable.
Deer
at
in
this
the
point,
headlights moment.
Deer in the headlights moment. I just absolutely love it, and you gotta love this stuff. We've got a quick voicemail to play for you. Our voicemail number is 219-2 P. Take a listen to this.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Doug from Escondido, California. I was calling to ask if the super PACs have any regulations that prohibit foreign powers from donating to them, and or if there are any. I'm sure that there are ways that they get around that if they want to. But that was my main question.
Okay, so in principle, foreign individuals are not supposed to be able to donate to American presidential campaigns. We're actually looking into now, Lewis, how easy it is as a foreigner to donate to a PAC. The PAC donates to the campaign. What's going on there with non-mandatory reporting and anonymity? Who really knows what's going on, right? And the letter of the law, it can be done because the letter of the law essentially doesn't matter if it's all secret anyway. I mean, it matters in principle, but if no one can find out, what difference does it make? On today's bonus show, we will talk about the cataloging of the Earth's rarest minerals. How many does Lewis have stored away in his apartment? We will talk about Beyonce and Red Lobster, and we will also talk about Indonesia banning gay emojis. The very, very moderate country of Indonesia says no to gay emojis. All of those stories and more, davidpakman.com/membership is how you get instant access to all of our exclusive content, including the world famous bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.